Now, up first on Ceres Country, Hawke's Bay is facing wildfires, worsening droughts, crop damage, and more pests and disease in the next 70 years as a result of climate change, according to a new report. From the weather there, I think we'll also add on top flooding at the moment. Of course, the report, Climate Change Predictions and Impacts for the Area, outline the future with a worst case scenario and alternatively what it could look like if the world takes effective action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Regional Council Chief Executive James Palmer joins us now from Napier. James, as I mentioned there, what is the weather doing since we're on that theme?
Good evening, Sarah. Well, look, it's coming down torrentially right now, and we've got some pretty serious flooding happening in Napier City. Of course, Napier was built on what was once an estuary, and the efficiency of their stormwater network in terms of the ability to get large volumes of water off the land is pretty low. So there are plenty of streets in full flood right now, and some houses being threatened, etc. And that just underscores some of the vulnerabilities we have in our coastal communities, in particular, in relation to climate change.
Let's talk about this wide-ranging assessment that was very comprehensive when it was focusing on climate change impacts in particularly the Hawke's Bay region. I mean, it's quite hard to predict that far out 70 years, but so where did the modelling come from?
So, look, we wanted to get a view of the range of potential climate change outcomes for Hawke's Bay. So we commissioned the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research, NIWA, to take all the best available science and look at what would be the likely scenarios across a whole range of different factors, everything from sort of, rainfall, drought, soil moisture, those sorts of considerations, and look over sort of to 2040 and then out to 2090, and consider what things would look like if emissions globally are reduced and we end up sort of plateauing as a nation and as a world, and also what happens if there's no action, what's a worst case scenario. So while nobody can predict the future, what we've got is a range of sort of scenarios to start informing our thinking.
And in farming, James, we say if you measure it, you can manage it, and I can imagine from a regional council perspective, very much the same. How do you bring together stakeholders from both rural and urban collectively to protect both environments?
Well, I think what's increasingly dawning on our urban communities is how incredibly dependent they are on primary production as the backbone of the New Zealand economy. That's been underscored through, obviously, the COVID experience, and certainly in our region, in Hawke's Bay, we understand the success of our region is heavily dependent on primary production. So I think it's getting people to understand how mutually dependent they are on one another economically, and then to show how the climate change impacts will affect both rural and urban communities alike. While the impacts are different for each sector, everybody's going to be challenged in some way, and everyone's going to have some investment they're going to need to make to deal with these issues.
And it's going to be an interesting job for the regional council when it isn't a level playing field across multiple either land holdings in terms of size and their take, as well as, of course, the requirements of water from different types of land uses as well. I know Hawke's Bay have come out and have declared they are a GMO-free region. Will Hawke's Bay dictate to landowners what they can and can't plant?
So the Regional Council to date hasn't taken a position on GMOs. The Hastings District Council in particular declared a GMO-free district. So the Regional Council hasn't gone there. And look, it's our view that those are matters to be dealt with nationally by appropriate legislation under the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act. So look, we're focusing our conversation with the community very much around other things we can manage within our region. And so that goes to things like the way we allocate and manage our freshwater resources. And so right now we've got a program of work around water security. We've got a couple of sites we're looking at for above ground storage, and we're also looking at our aquifer systems for their storage capacity through managed aquifer recharge. So look, your viewers will recall that our council did invest $20 million into the Rua Taniwha Water Storage Scheme, and that was a scheme that ultimately wasn't built because of a Supreme Court decision in relation to Department of Conservation land that was required for the dam site. So what we've decided is that we can't simply wait for central government to sort that out, and we need to look at Plan B. And so we've got a large work program at the moment looking at water security and the Plan B. But look, for a lot of our hill country, look, water storage isn't the solution. It will be evolving farming practice. And so following last year's drought, or this year's drought, the drought that we've just come out of the back end of, we've started work now on a drought resilience strategy. And really what we want to ensure is that all of our hill country farmers have every tool available to them to ensure that they're managing their farming system in a way that can cope with what NIWA is predicting by way of increased frequency and severity of droughts.
Let's talk about wildfires. And we've seen the tragic Lake Ohau fires this year in the Mackenzie Basin. As a regional council, what work can you do in that space to protect the population of Hawke's Bay?
Well, this is one thing, Sarah, that worries me an awful lot. A couple of years ago, we did have a couple of fire incidents, actually one just up the valley from me, where some pine forests ended up in flames and threatening a range of farms and houses. And I think, look, the reality is that the east coast of New Zealand is going to dry out. And it's a combination of higher temperatures, some predicted less rainfall overall, so drier temperatures, but also that greater rate of evapotranspiration. You put that all together with some wind that we expect as well, like bigger wind events, and the whole place just dries out as it did last summer, and that creates some real risk around fires. I mean, there can be grasses, but also particularly our plantation forestry. So I think we've got to think really carefully as both as a region, as a country, about how we design our forest systems to ensure that we don't have too many eggs in one basket. So yeah, we're currently working with our Civil Defence and with Fire and Emergency New Zealand around looking at that future planning of forestry. And look, while we don't have all the tools right now to make these decisions, my personal view is that we're going to get ourselves into a space of far more planned land use in the future as a country. And part of that is to protect our high value soils that are there for food production, but also thinking about where forestry is best to be placed and what sort of forestry we're talking about, whether it's reversion to native bush in some parts or it's exotic forest as well. So at the moment we've got a bit of a free-for-all. The market rules, and people can sell their farm to a forestry company and have it converted. It's not always clear that we've got forests going in the right place, and many of your viewers will know that we're sometimes sacrificing good food production land for forestry, but there are other places where we probably need forestry and it's suited. So it's about actually having sensible guidance about where we should have the right mix of land use with that changing climate profile.
How do you believe the sole Labour government over the next 3 years, James, will do to support the Hawke's Bay region that won't be just reliant on your ratepayers as well?
Well, look, I think we've seen from the incoming government an interest in land use decision making. So they have pledged support for protecting our highly productive soils. So we'd expect that we're going to see some form of national regulation that makes it easier for councils to make land use decision making, which is in the best interest of primary production, but also in terms of the environment as well. So expecting more tools in the toolkit from central government. Look, I think one of the realities of the kind of the climate future we're facing is that we are going to need to plan for the future more. And I think what you're seeing with the Resource Management Act changes that are being proposed, there's a drift back towards more central planning. And I think, the argument runs that New Zealand threw the baby out with the bathwater. We've got We've got too far away from planning, and as a consequence, we've done some dumb things in some dumb places, and we haven't provided for the housing we need and all of the infrastructure we need for our growing urban communities. But similarly, in our rural environments, we've had some relatively haphazard land use decisions made as well. So I think really where we're going to as a country, which we'll see out of this government, is more directive planning. My plea to the government is that that's done, with communities, and we take communities with us on those decisions, and it's not all imposed from Wellington.
Well, that was very much a great segue into my last question, James, because for a CEO of a regional council in New Zealand, you seem to have a lot more hair than I would think, because these freshwater regulations, most around the country, are tearing their hair out.
Well, look, we've got an enormous amount of work to do over the next few years, and I'd be lying if I said that I didn't worry about the timetable that we're on in particular. There is a huge expectation that we're going to do an awful lot really quickly, but I think what that's come from is a growing impatience by our urban communities around cleaning up our waterways. And I think there's a degree of unrealism about that. I think people don't recognise that the state of our waterways have got that way over a century in many cases, and our urban communities make a huge impact on water quality as well. So there's a huge amount of work to do, and I don't think people understand how much investment's required, how long it's going to take. So again, I think there's a job to do to take everybody with us on this journey, and that's what we as a council are very much focused on.
James, you've got a comment come in that James Palmer is someone worth listening to. So there's people out there that are supporting you to be one of those people in those roles. Thank you so much, James Palmer, the CEO of Hawke's Bay Regional Council.
This is Sarah's Country.